You're listening to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast, where we discuss whatever the fuck we want to. And yes, we can put sex and drugs and Jesus all in the same bed and still be all right at the end of the day. My name is Devanin, and I'll be interviewing guests from every corner of this world as we dig into topics that are too risque for the morning show, as we strive to help you understand what's really going on in your life. There is nothing off the table, and we've got a lot to talk about, so let's dive right into this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. So thankful and excited to have you with me again this week. Today I'm talking with Heidi. This beautiful woman is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in polyamory coaching, therapy, and education. So in this episode, we're going to take a look into the world of polyamory. We're going to talk about whether or not meaningless sex is harmful to us. We get into the fallacy of patriarchy. We talk about jealousy in relationships. And then we talk about coming out as polyamorous. I had never heard of that before, and I was most intrigued to learn about this particular topic. Heidi is a strong woman. She's fiery and feisty, and I'm so happy to present her to the world. Heidi. Hi,
Hello.
friend. What's the tea on your end, biatch?
Hi. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yep, welcome to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast, where Jesus is in the building, y'all, and so is dick and pussy and cum and all the other good things that we're going to talk about today. And I'm here with Miss Heidi Seville. She is a licensed clinical social worker, an LCSW. My favorite aspect of the mental health field are the LCSWs. That's what I have myself, that I talk to one every week. I recommend some sort of mental health professional to each and every last one of us souls, because we get fucked up in life in ways that we may not be aware of. I think mental health is a great asset to your personal well-being, self-care plan. And so Heidi's going to talk about this from a very unique angle today. She has a focus on polyamorous relationships and things like that. And so tell us a little bit about like your history and everything like that, girlfriend.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Where do I start? So, gosh, I'm going to sound like such a cliche, but I totally came to the world of polyamory in like such a cliched way, where I was like in a marriage that wasn't totally working. And we were like, like this isn't quite working. We were able to like identify that we weren't really meeting each other's needs. And when we got down to talking about it, we were like, neither one of us totally is 100% like into monogamy. Like that's not really a core value for us. So why don't we explore beyond that? And we had a whole progression of ways we did it. It started with like visiting sex clubs and doing kind of that swinger thing. And that didn't I didn't love that. I'm going to be honest. Sex with strangers, totally great for a lot of people. It's not my jam. I really wanted the emotional connection, the intimacy piece, and like just developing like connection and care with folks. And I wasn't getting that in the whole sex with strangers fee. So we decided to look into polyamory, which is different in that it involves romance, it involves love, it involves lasting connections with other folks. And so that's kind of the doorway. That was the doorway for me that I entered through to start learning about the whole world of polyamory.
I can just hear the Aladdin theme song, A Whole New World, and the fantastic point of view. A whole new world.
Yes. Oh my gosh. When I first got started, it was like when I would talk to people about it. So we started like going to some educational groups and discussion groups and reading all the books. And I remember telling a friend that it was like I had been going to the same restaurant my whole life and ordering off the menu. And all of a sudden I discovered that there was like a fold out page in the middle that like folded open, and there was all these other things on the menu that like I never knew were there because like I never bothered to like flip open the menu and see the little fold out insert inside. So it was very much that whole new world vibe for me in a big way to get that started.
I appreciate your desire to have the connection. That's kind of like what they call a demisexual these days, is like somebody who would prefer to have sex with someone they are acknowledging the emotional in, spiritual, the unseen, the non-physical things that tie us to people when we copulate and we fuck and everything like that. I don't think that those things ever go away. I just think some people choose to ignore them during
Mhm.
sex, you know, for their own reasons and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. Is it surface level? Surface level, absolutely, but that's what they want it to be.
Sure.
So, so, and I have my own evolving thoughts and theories on whether or not we're actually damaging ourselves when we hook up with people we don't know and deny the emotional and the acknowledgement of the emotional and the mental connection that comes along with that, because that's a part of who we are. Like, you can't really turn your emotions off. You can detach from them to go and
Mhm.
have certain experiences, but you can't get rid of them because,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know so I'm wondering, are we hurting ourselves when we have this, what many people like to call meaningless sex, and they view it as like they're freeing themselves somehow, I guess. But, I wonder if, and I don't know the answer to this yet. I'm still molding it over. I'm still researching shit. I'll probably write a blog on it. But I just wonder, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think that like I think there is room to have like casual sex. I I didn't agree with you that like if we call it meaningless sex, I think that doesn't honor the experience, right? Like, because I think even casual sex, even sex with a stranger, if that is something that you happen to be into, can be meaningful. And so I think it's less like, do you have sex with strangers? Do you have people that you have a deep emotional connection with? And more like, do you regard every sexual experience as something shared, as a form of intimacy, even if it's a brief moment of sharing with someone you're never going to see again, but still like are you open to influencing and being influenced by, and are you open to tapping into the emotional experience and to the intimacy that comes with like sharing sexual energy with another human?
I concur. And a lot of people who get into the whole casual sex thing will be like, well, I'm not going to marry everyone I fuck. Well, we know that, but that doesn't mean it has to be meaningless altogether. There's somewhere in between there, you know.
Right. Well, and I think that gets into this whole idea of like, what do we what do we count as meaningful? And I think in the world of compulsory heterosexuality and in the world of compulsory monogamy, there's this idea that the only thing that counts or the only thing that's meaningful is something that results in like marriage or kids or a long-term relationship, and that I think really discounts a lot of people's connections and a lot of people's experiences that are still meaningful without like, ending resulting in those markers of success.
Right. So what you're saying, Heidi, is that we've been pre-programmed by society, conservative churches, and all kinds of stuff like that to believe that the only sort of thing that has any meaning has to be like your typical family unit or some kind of shit or whatever the fuck is supposed to be like considered normal and stuff like that. And so anything other than that, okay, I could see that. I could see that. Well, then we're gonna have to really, really talk through this to bring value to all things, because my take is this: we all have certain amount of a limited number of minutes, seconds, hours in our lifetime per day. If you want to make it more granular, so you're going to decide what's important to you to go and do. So if you're going to go and fuck a stranger for 30 minutes or an hour, you know that that's 30 minutes or an hour that you cannot get back. And
Mhm.
so as opposed to going to do countless other things, you make your choice of what the fuck you're going to do. So what was it that's so important about this experience with this stranger that you're willing to give up 30 minutes or an hour of your life? And then And that's fine. If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But then for someone to come away from it and say, well, that didn't mean anything. Or, I'm like, oh, bitch, but it did because you gave them your time, which is one of the few resources that you can never get back. So,
Mm.
you can't make it, you can't create more time. And so I wonder if people are not running from the truth within themselves for a bunch of different reasons. And I know that we're probably not going to answer that specifically on this show today because everybody has a different answer to that question. I just want to pose these talking points so that people can begin to consider why they're doing what they're doing and why they believe what they believe and why they've been describing it the way they've been describing it.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Like, and that's like in the work that I do, it's like a lot of when I work with clients, it's around like, let's look at these default assumptions that you have been handed by society, by, your parents or your school or your church or wherever. And like, let's see, do these really even fit for you? Are these what you want? Like, do these align with your own core values and beliefs? And in the world of non-monogamy, in breaking down the kind of blueprint or the norms or the things we've been handed, one of the things that we talk about is something called the relationship escalator. And so that's this prescribed way that we've all been taught that relationships should go. So that they should escalate in a certain order on a certain timeline. And it looks something like, all right, you meet, you have sex, you fall in love, you move in together, you get married, depending on your level of privilege, maybe you buy property, maybe you have share an animal, maybe you have kids, whatever it might be. And that is what marks like a meaningful, committed, progressing relationship. It's got to go in that order along that escalator. And if it doesn't, then it's not really serious or it's not meaningful or it doesn't count or it's not the real thing. And I think that in non-monogamy, it's starting to like break that down and be like, well, now wait a minute. What if I meet the love of my life and, decide that I want to be with this person forever, but actually I really dig living alone and I never want to move in with them. I'd like to stay living alone for the rest of my life. Does that mean that our relationship is less meaningful? Does that mean that we're not committed? Or, let's say I meet someone and we get married but we still want to keep falling in love with other people and having other relationships. Does that mean that what we have isn't committed, that it's not meaningful? And I think in non-monogamy, what we say is like, absolutely not. It doesn't mean any of those things.
Well, that's because y'all are coming from a more liberated mindset, and I'm hearing all the religious undertones and what you're saying. Because like the concept that like you must live together, comes from like you know how people used to shame people back in the day. If a guy got a girl pregnant and they weren't married, they weren't living together, then shame, 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 shame. But but I'm happy that in your work, you're working with people to challenge again why they believe what they believe. So in my research of you aside from being an LCSW, you offer like coaching. I saw small group coaching, individual coaching, couples coaching. Tell me about this coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So the main thing I do is this small group coaching. My program is called Steady Your Polywobbles. And it's for folks who are newer to polyamory, who are like, who are wobbling, who are feeling wobbly, who are like, I want to be doing this, but holy shit, is this hard? I'm like, you know, really struggling with either the shame or the assumptions or the jealousy or the stigma that's coming from my community when I try to talk about what my relationships look like. And it's a small group setting where we go through week by week all of those challenges, break them down, talk about how to work through them, talk about those tools and skills that work for folks, and really start to unpack like, how can you do this in an authentic way that feels grounded and feels like, and how do you shed some of that stigma, some of that shame, some of that conditioning that tells you, oh, well, if this person has sex with me, but then has some sex with someone else, then that must be a betrayal, or that means they don't love me as much, or that means I'm not good enough, or something like that. And really unpacking that and starting to break that down and being like, now wait a minute, where did we learn that? And is that necessarily true? And some of it too is like speaking to the religious piece. I mean, I grew up Jewish, but we've got our own stuff around like different ways that shame gets baked in, but within religion, I think there's so many ways that monogamy gets elevated, right? Specifically heterosexual monogamy as like, this is the pillar of the community. This is what things should look like. And if you don't do this, then you're not like fulfilling your mission, your goal in life. You're not serving your purpose. And I think it's just so limiting for so many folks.
Speaking of being Jewish, another thing that I'm researching deeply now and probably will do a blog about, well, most certainly will do a blog about it is, exactly like parameters. If you're going to be talking about Yahweh or the Hebrew God, like what, how does a sex life jive with the proper course of righteousness to live good on this earth and still be able to get into heaven, which is something that plagues a lot of people's minds. And it's a juxtaposition, a contradiction, I don't know what the hell you would want to call it, in between how open relationship people were in the Old Testament versus how the relationships kind of really aren't talked about that much in the New Testament. And conservatives don't really, the conservative people like to go into the Old Testament and get everything to corral and control people with.
Mhm.
They like whatever kind of scripture you want to think of, be it something that's supposedly against homosexuality or whatever. But then they don't talk about the more liberal stuff, like say all the wives say King David had and all his concubines and stuff like that. And so, or all the wives the forefathers had, they had plenty of pussy, around them at all fucking
Mhm.
times. And so somebody asked me, what does God say? Is it cool for me to have two wives, two husbands, a four-way marriage or whatever? The first thing I'm going to tell everybody is, pray and the Lord will tell you what he does and doesn't want you to do as long as you're actually truly approaching him to correct you the way he wants to above anything any of us are going to tell you. Hear from him first. And secondly, well, we just have to, I don't know yet because I have to go through and see, I'm really, really researching because there's certain times where people did something sexual and maybe it was bad. And, but then you hear a lot of talk about like prostitution and everything like that. And that's usually always brought up in a negative. But then you turn around and there's like 2,300 wives and 2,000 concubines. So clearly it's not, it's not that black and white.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think about it a little differently, and I don't, and maybe part of it is because I come from a different religious background, and maybe part of it is because, I mean, I've always been a bit of a rebel. So even when I was a kid at Hebrew school, I was like challenging my instructors. I was poking holes in the arguments, and I was like pointing out what I thought as like the deep sexism that I felt like was part of the Judaism as it was taught to me. But I look back on those stories and I think like, wow, how convenient that it was always like the men having lots and lots of wives, but it's never the women having lots and lots of husbands. And like in some ways, I think to that and I'm like, that feels like it's really reinforcing a lot of the like patriarchal pieces that that really keep men in a position of power. And I think that what I love so much about modern day polyamory is it subverts a lot of that and wants to be a lot of polyamory, not all polyamory. Some of it can be kind of toxic, but a lot of it is around like unpacking that and being like, how can this be feminist? How can this be anti-capitalist? How can this really step outside of the patriarchal mold and do something a little different?
I was thinking about that earlier because I was in when I always challenge people in their like interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. I always like to call it the Hebrew Bible because unlike say like Republicans and evangelicals and shit try to act like it's actually not our book. We didn't
Mm,
create it. It comes from the Middle
mhm,
East, and I think more honor should be paid to the bloodline of Abraham.
mhm,
That's what
mhm,
it's all about, boils down to. That's how it all ends in the book of Revelation. Everything's about the bloodline of Abraham, really. The rest of us are fortunate enough to have access to the same God, but it is not really our religion. And so therefore, when people come to me, trying to say this and that, I'm all like, yeah, but you probably haven't even read the Aramaic or the Hebrew or the Greek or anything like that. Most people don't. It,
Mhm, mhm,
thousands of translations of the Bible, quote unquote translations, you know, is what most people use to try to preach from or to try to tell other people how to live their lives. But it's not, they're not even reading the Bible in its original language. And for all the talk against, the Torah, the different other religions out there, at least, people like say read other religious texts, read it in its original language. And I have all the respect, for Eastern cultures for keeping shit as like pure in its essence as it was. The Bible is very diluted. And one thing that I've started saying a lot lately is, we were not represented, old, white conservative men interpret the Bible. They didn't invite American Indians and women and black people and 2S LGBTQIA people to the table when the Bible was first was translated and everything. They didn't have us weigh in on that. You just had a
mhm,
bunch of fucking white men doing what they do, trying to control everything. And what you're saying, that's how come there's no women with a bunch of husbands. It's not to say it didn't happen
mhm,
back
mhm.
then, but they're not gonna want that shit in recorded history.
Right, right, right. And like, I think that anytime you translate something, it's translated through the lens of the person who's like reading it. And if these are like conservative white men doing it, then yes, like it's going to be translated through their lens and it's probably going to reflect, the way they see it or the way they want it to be. And you're absolutely right. Like if there's any mention of things that go against that, like, patriarchal tradition, that's probably gonna get left out.
Right, they're not having none of that because that removes their control and it breaks down their construct of how they believe shit should be. And we see that happening before our very eyes with our own government, they'll say of January 6th, Republicans, that wasn't an insurrection, that was just a friendly day at the Capitol. You know,
Mhm,
they are willing, people with that mindset, just the same as always through the history of time, will rewrite history right in front of your eyes because they believe people are stupid.
mhm,
A large part of why I do what I do, and unfortunately, a lot of people are fucking stupid, not because they're necessarily born that way, but because they don't want to research the knowledge that is so readily available at their fingertips. It's much easier to just let a preacher tell you what to think or to let fucking Fox News tell you what to think when you can just go and find the shit out on your own. And so I'm not saying all this, and we're not saying all this to necessarily sow this seeds of discord, but we are sowing seeds of free thought. And I'm trying to pull you off of the titties of your preachers and your pastors because you don't really need them as much as you think you do. And politicians and everything like that. So, I really, really want people to think for themselves and to research for themselves. And there's so much freedom in that, you know,
yeah.
which is what you're doing in your work. Now, tell me about I also noticed that you have a queer and transgender and inclusivity policy. So I want to make that clear that you work with all the peoples. Now, why is inclusivity so important to you, Heidi?
Yeah, yeah. So the way that I really approach polyamory is that I believe that it is a structure that is about consent. It's about love. It's about honoring people in for their authentic self. And I think it is about disrupting patriarchal traditions. And I think polyamory at its best disrupts that. And in patriarchal traditions, I think queer folks and trans folks get erased, and they're either erased through violence or through negligence or through just ignoring their existence. And I think that polyamory, because it exists within, we exist within the society that we're in, it we have to be careful not to let it fall into, especially as it enters more into the mainstream, not to let it fall into those old traditions where it's dominated by, you know, cis straight white folks. who are like the only ones being represented, because that's when I think about what polyamory really is about, that's not what it's about. It's about there being space for different types of relationships and connections and love as long as there is consent. And so I think it's so important that we don't erase the existence or the experiences of trans and queer folks, and that we let all of that be, we make space explicitly to honor that. And, as someone, I identify as queer. And so I'm very sensitive to if there is like a space. And, unfortunately, it happens even within the polyamory community where suddenly it's just this like assumption of heterosexuality. Not as often, but it can. And I'm very sensitive to that because I think because polyamory is has the potential to be such a subversive space and so disruptive to that norm, that it's so important that we make sure that we are intentionally carving out space for all those experiences and not just the ones that, you know, patriarchal capitalist society wants to elevate.
Hmm. Well, knowledge is power. And as the Bible says, people perish for lack of knowledge. But we're gonna get our heads filled with some good shit. Now, I want you to tell me about a good client success story. I know you can give me names and details and all of that because of patient confidentiality, but I'm hoping that you can give me an example of somebody who came to you one way. I'd like to know whatever their fucked up scenario or circumstance or problem was. And after you coached them, worked with them, counseled them, how they came out better the other end.
Yeah. Yeah. So, oh, let's see. Trying to think of which one to go with.
Think about it, girl. Sip some of that tea you got in that big ass cup. She's got
Yeah.
this huge, this big ass red cup. It looks like it's about a foot tall with her little tea tassel hanging out the end of it.
I don't mess around with my tea.
You came ready to spill some tea today, honey.
Okay, so I had one person come to me who had been in like a series of serially monogamous relationships, just like one monogamous relationship after another, and ended up feeling really like controlled and resentful in each of them, and would like end them and then kind of pop right back into another one. And then be in that relationship and ride it out for that first year of honeymoon phase, and then start to feel really like controlled and resentful and like, having to make a lot of like concessions for her partner's ego or things like that, or, moving in with them and then feeling really combined. And so when I started working with this person, they were in a relationship, but really in that cycle of feeling burnt out on it. They ended the relationship, and we did a lot of work around like, what are your core values when it comes to your own identity, when it comes to your relationships, what you want. And this person really discovered that they wanted to explore the world of non-monogamy, that because for them, their social relationships were so important to them. And because they wanted their independence and autonomy, that the traditional structure of like, oh, you fall in love with someone, you move in, and then like they become your top priority and everyone else is just like there. They wanted to disrupt that. And that wasn't working for them. And so they chose kind of a kind of non-monogamy that's called relationship anarchy, which is about like it gets away from the idea of, oh, we prioritize our romantic relationships above our friend relationships, and says like we're doing away with those priorities. Like my connections are all valuable, and I decide how much I want to prioritize them based on, a lot of other factors, not based just on, is it someone I'm having sex with, or is it someone I live with? And so this person started really exploring like, dating. And we talked about, well, who do you want to date and how do you want to date? And what does it mean to you to have a relationship escalate? And they realized, yeah, I don't think I want to move in with someone. Like that's not actually important to me. And so, they started dating and saying to people, hey, I like you, I care about you, I want to foster this connection, and like, I'm not going to want to move in. And they started really making more time for their friends, to where as they started exploring and getting into different relationships, they were able to maintain those friendships in the same level. And then we worked through stuff like jealousy, like the first time they were dating someone who, let's say, was like also dating someone else, and came to me and said, like, gosh, like, I know that I said that I believed in this and I do, but like, holy shit, there's a lot of jealousy coming up for me. How do I deal with that? And so we really worked at like unpacking that and breaking that down and looking at like, okay, what is jealousy really? And I actually have a mini course that if folks go to my website, they can check it out. It's for free. So it'll just be on my website. Maybe, yeah, I can talk about that later. But the mini course is like part of how I came up with this, is going through it with this person where it's like, all right, let's look at what jealousy really is. Because we talk about jealousy like it's just a feeling, but really jealousy has like 3 layers to it. And only one of those layers is the feeling. The other layers are the thoughts and interpretation that come with jealousy. And then the other one is like the body nervous system response to jealousy. And so when working with this person, we really broke down those 3 layers of jealousy and how you deal with each one. And by the time we were done working together, this person was like living their best life, like had a really robust community of friends, had, I think at that time, 2 different people that they had like an intimate connection with, that they saw a couple times a week. They had their job that was like thriving, and they were, they were working through and managing the how to come out to people, how to deal with some of the stigma, how to, continue to live in a way that felt like it was in line with their values, how to make sure that they were consenting to the pieces they wanted to within all their relationships.
Wait, when you say come out, you mean like coming out polyamorous?
Hmm.
Or
Yeah.
talk to me about that. So people have to go through or some people feel like they need to go through a process of coming out to what friends, family is like, hey, I'm not monogamous. I'm actually polyamorous. How big of a deal is this?
I mean, depending on how you live your life, it's a huge deal because, like, if you don't come out, let's say, you're coming to the family barbecue and you bring one of your partners and everyone's like, who the fuck is this? And where's Bob? Like, what happened? Like, this isn't your partner. Are you cheating? What's happening here? Like, does your, other partner know what's happening right now? And so if you don't come out, you look like a cheater.
Bow cheater. Are you just gonna bring your hoe to the family barbecue, bitch? What?
Yeah, yeah. And and because of the assumptions people make, or let's say, they see you out in the community, they come up to you and they're like, who are you making out with over here at the bar? Who is this person? And like, does your wife know you're here? Does your husband know you're here? Like, what the heck? And so coming out becomes really important because, you know, a lot of polyamorous people, like, don't want to be seen as cheaters, and they want to, with their friends and with their family, be able to, just like monogamous people are like, hey, my partner is part of my life. I want them to be part of my friend group. I want them to be part of my family. Polyamorous people might feel that way about all their partners. And, if they don't come out, then it's like, what is, everyone's going to be like, what's the story here?
Well, shit. Well, I say I would treat it the same damn way. Like I personally never came out because I just by the time I was an adult and I don't know, and everything, I just was like, you know what? Fuck all of y'all, everyone in my family and everything. If you don't like my lifestyle, you can like eat shit for all I give a shit. But I know not everybody's going to be like that, but I have successfully detached myself from the opinions of others. And so, which is a very liberating thing. I highly recommend it to every fucking body on the globe. Because once we get over giving a damn about what people think about us, oh my God, like you like regress 10 years, like in a good way. You like become 10 years younger, everything like that. So it sucks that people feel like they need to explain who they are. Because straight people in like regular one-on-one relationships are just straight people that don't have to come out straight They don't have to go around saying, "You know what? I'm gonna be straight.
Yeah.
Hope you still love me and accept me and everything."
Yeah.
So, and I'm all like, "Well, those bitches don't have to come out straight, then I'm not gonna come out polyamorous. I'm just gonna show up with my 10 fucking lovers, and I wish a bitch would say something." So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's like that's another way of coming out, right?
well,
Is like
exposure. Look at
just
yeah.
like coming out is really just like I mean, coming out is in some ways it's just showing up as you are, unabashed. And like that can be a form of coming out, you know? And so and some people do come out that way and it's like, "Yep, this is my relationship. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. This is just me." But the thing about coming out as polyamorous too, that it feels like worth mentioning is that it takes a lot of privilege to be able to come out because, some people either, based on a lot of reasons, rely on their community a lot more and if they don't have a lot of societal privileges, they can't risk being like excommunicated from their community because they may rely on them for things like work or finances or housing or things like that. And the other piece that I think is really important to note is that relationship structure is not a protected class. So, like, being queer is a protected class, right? Like, you can't be fired for being queer. You can't be discriminated against. You absolutely can be fired for being polyamorous. You can be discriminated against for being polyamorous. There's no legal protection around that. And in fact, a lot of places have like morality clauses where one of the things included in their morality clause is something around infidelity. And they'll view it as infidelity and be like, "Oh, you violated the morality clause. Sorry, bye." And fire folks. So, there's a lot of baggage around coming out.
That's a goddamn shame. Because then that puts people in a position where they're not gonna truly be happy. Because if you're ever in a position in your life where you can't live out loud and you're stifling, a part of yourself, then you risk of becoming, very unhappy. So you're going to this job that you may love and you're making the money that you wanna make. But heaven forbid if the word gets around town, may go to a bowling alley and be seen by a coworker, and now you may lose your job. You're living constantly under a certain amount of fear.
Yeah.
And now the massage therapist in me, and I am a licensed massage therapy and a licensed hypnotherapist. The therapist in me is going, okay, what are going to be the long term health implications of this? Even if it's not seemingly a lot of fear, that shit pulls on your anatomy over time, and then it can appear as different ailments. It can appear as cancers, as tumors, as cysts, as different shit going wrong in your body. And the doctors are trying to trace it and they can't find the root cause of it. The root cause of it is the stress that you're under because you're living at least some portion of a lie, even if the whole thing isn't, that it's not the whole truth. And,
Mhm.
well, and I know it's not easy to just pack all your shit up and like leave, but maybe we could start an exit strategy. Like that's my message to the people in Florida right now. So like y'all's government is gone to shit. It's just all fucked. So all the gay people, all the 2S LGBTQ polyamorous people just leave Florida. We'll all meet up in California or in fucking Canada, somewhere where shit's like cool. Like we can't fix that shit. So
Yeah, and I think you're right, as you were talking about, like, the whole, like, going to a bowling alley and being seen, like, I was thinking, like, gosh, so much of it depends on where you live, because I live in Portland, Oregon, and, it's a pretty liberal place, and there are tons of polyamory folks here, like, lots of us, and, not like you don't face stigma in Portland, because you surely still do, but, it's not a place where you're probably gonna get fired from your job if you're seen at the bowling alley with your 3 partners.
and for those of you who may not know what I'm talking about, right now in Florida, they have like this whole bill so you can't say anything gay and stuff like that. I think in schools, basically they're just trying to snub and stifle all things that are not straight
Yep.
and et cetera, et cetera. And then if that happens, then that leads to, I don't know, burnings and witch hunts next. They just really want us all dead anyway. So my whole thing is, it's just like going to a church that has the anti-LGBTQIA plus policy. Why stay there and fight with them when you just fucking go somewhere else where you're going to be more welcomed? Now it's
Mhm.
easier to switch churches than it is to switch states, but you see the warning signs, you see the shit coming. People in Florida start making your play get out now, especially if this fucking bill passes. you we don't need this. Florida ain't that damn great. The best thing you have is Miami, Key West,
Mhm.
Orlando, and Pensacola, which are all your gay spots anyway. All the bullshit in between. Okay, fuck them.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's so real though, and I think there's so many, it's not just Florida where those kind of bills are passing
Right.
either. Like there's a lot of states that are going through that right now, and it
If
is a shame.
fuck you, Texas, and all of that. It's a goddamn shame. So you mentioned some of the emotions that come along with polyamory. I find that they present themselves in monogamy too. We talked about jealousy a lot, inadequacy, fear of a loss, learning to let go of the expectations of compulsory monogamy, which we've kind of been touching on here or there. Speak to me about the inadequacy issue because I found in my relationships with men, a lot of them come to me with these preconceived notions of inadequacy surrounding dick size, dick appearance. I didn't say anything. I was just trying to bounce on the motherfucker. But he has all of these things in his head about what size it's supposed to be, should be, what it should look like. And I don't, and it's like a male thing. I kind of identify more with female on most days. So I'm not trying to take this struggle from them. I don't get it.
Mhm.
'Cause I'm not
Mhm.
the digger works, Imma do something with it, period, done. But but they're not like that. It's a whole big deal to them. So I can imagine, and I know from talking to guys when they have orgies and shit like that, they tend to measure their dicks against the other guys in the room rather than just focusing on having fun. So this is ingrained into them. And so I just want you to talk about inadequacies. It doesn't have to be dick inadequacies. That's just been my struggle, what I've encountered. So I thought
Mhm.
I'd throw it out there. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and you touched on this a little, that it's so easy to get into the comparison game, you know? And especially when you're talking about non-monogamy. So if you're dating someone who's also dating other people, it's so easy to go into like comparing, well, what does that person have that I don't? Are they better at this? Are they better at that? Are they, how do they look compared to me? And that's such an easy trap to fall into. And it's, it doesn't lead to anything good. I mean, like you said, it leads to like taking yourself out of the experience, comparing to other people. In some ways, like, especially when it comes to things like appearance or size, it leads us to objectify ourselves and objectify other people when we are narrowing down our focus to just someone's appearance or just their size or things like that. And that takes the humanity out of it. So as much as possible, I like to acknowledge that it is very human to do the comparison thing. And when you notice you're doing it, the best thing to do is start to like gently pull back from it, to step away, to bring the focus back to you. And part of that, especially this is so true in polyamory, it's like the idea of like, well, am I really good enough? Am I special? What if I was good enough? Would you really need these other people? Those are like old monogamy mindset things that can creep in and people can say. And what I encourage people to do is focus on like, what is unique about you? What is it about you that you offer and you bring that that is just yours? And like that your partner sees in you and loves in you that has nothing to do with, these objective things about like, oh, well, is my dick as big as your other partner's dick? Or, is my waist as small or whatever the things are. Or even like, are they funnier than I am? Even getting into those kinds of comparisons, like pulling back and really staying present and like, what do I have to offer? What are the unique things that make me, me and the way I am? And I find that when I do that personally, I get so much more grounded in myself and my own like value and worth as a partner and as a friend. And like even the things about me that are like kind of like quirky and weird, like I can embrace even those things when I step out of comparison. Like, I mean, there are things about me that like my partners end up loving about me, but like they wouldn't have to. Like I have no sense of direction at all. I couldn't find my way out of a paper bag. I snort when I laugh. I like, I get words wrong all the time. I make up words in place of real words. And like, these are things that I could be like, oh, well, these are my inadequacies. These are things that make, you know, like maybe other partners have these things going on that I don't. But really, instead, I can be like, yeah, these are the things that make me Heidi. This is like all of the unique features that make me my own Heidiness, goodness, and people can like it or not. And when I can like really ground in like my own uniqueness and my own values and what I have to offer and take my focus off of what other people have to offer, I find that I can move out of that inadequacy place, if that makes sense.
It does. It all makes perfect sense. You smart ass bitch you. I love it. So, so as you're saying that, though, I'm reminded of my own inadequacy struggles. So like say like with my current partner, much better relationship than I've had with the previous ones. I'm thinking that a lot of the inadequacies that we suffer through Heidi have to do with like previous hurt and stuff like that. So I think like if somebody's really struggling with this, it may take a good LCSW, perhaps some of your coaching sessions or something like that. I know I needed a lot of help and, professional help in order to get over it. So like my dad had said like two affairs. I've had guys do like, dishonest, shit with me and stuff like that. The negative things as well as the positive things that we experience imprint upon us, especially upon our subconscious, and then they tend to pull at us when we think we've gotten over it, and maybe we haven't. Because if you have gone through a negative experience and you have not intentionally tackled it and processed it, then chances are it's still there. Like those things don't tend to sprout wings and fly away on their own. so
Yep.
so, because I was with him, I would get bothered if he would look at somebody else, in an attractive, and I thought that maybe he was attracted to them. And I would do the whole comparison thing, maybe it's because, I weigh more than them or, what is it that they have that I don't, all of that, all of this, and then I started working on it and, aggressively do a lot of prayer, meditation, you know, and I keep me some sort of psychotherapist at all times. My hypnotherapy training helped me a lot too, to really get into the subconscious. And now, I went from arguing with him if I felt like he was disrespecting me by looking at somebody else, when we were out and about to having three ways and being totally cool with it. And, I just kind of stepped back and I looked at it, like, why was I making such a big deal out of this? I can just easily watch him have sex with somebody and just not really have an opinion about it one way or the other. Because I finally come to a point where I'm like, it's not me. He can have sex with someone or look at someone else and it doesn't have to be meant against me. You know, I stopped
Yeah,
taking it personally.
totally. Totally. And I think that what you're getting at is like something that I think is so important for monogamous people or polyamorous people. Like whether or not you end up wanting to have three ways with your partner or not, like the idea that, we are not made to only find one person attractive. There's not like
Right.
we are attracted to what we're attracted to. And the idea that once we fall in love, that like that part of us would just die or turn off is ridiculous. Like, of course we're gonna still find people attractive, even if we're in a monogamous relationship, right? Like, of course we're gonna check people out and be like, damn, I can appreciate that aesthetic. That is someone I find attractive. And like that how do we move past the idea that that is a betrayal? How do we move into like we are each our own full humans who get to have these experiences? And the thing I like about polyamory is it focuses on like what are the relationship agreements? And I think that could be true in monogamy too. Like we have a relationship agreement, let's say in monogamy, that we only have sex with each other. That being said, like part of like honoring and acknowledging our full humanity is recognizing that like we can both be attracted to lots of different folks. And maybe, it's part of our agreement that we like to flirt with people. And that's like part of how we relate. And that doesn't need to have anything to do with me. That doesn't have to be that doesn't mean that I am inadequate in any way just because my partner finds other people attractive. Like, I think I'm attractive, but I am a specific kind of attractive. And there's a whole universe of different kinds of attractiveness out there. And if I have a partner who appreciates those other kinds, then that's great. And that's not indicative of a failure on my part. And again, like I think monogamous people could learn this just as much as polyamorous people could.
Oh, fuck yeah. And I just remembered that's where I had learned not everything is about me thing is when I was in my working with my sponsor, working through like the 12 steps and like Crystal Meth Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and stuff like that. And which is it's a lot of psychotherapy mixed into drug rehab anyway. And so, but you don't have to be a drug addict to, I think, benefit from some of the lessons. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the anonymous movement. That's why I'm not a part of it anymore. But there was some good shit that I took out of it. And the best thing that I did was that not every fucking thing has to be about me.
Mm,
And once I internalized that, I was able to let so much shit go because I have never paid attention to the fact that I was making everything about me. So
mm.
then once I got over myself, then I stopped being hurt about everything, my partner was doing, and
Yeah,
I have a much happier life now.
totally. Yeah. Yeah. Like not, I think that's part of the unlearning. I think we learn that like love is scarce and love is something that like we have to protect. And there's only so much love. And if our partners love someone else, that means they love us less. And like when we can let go of that idea of scarcity, then it's not like it doesn't have to have anything to do with me if my partner finds someone else attractive or wants to date someone else or whatever, because like there's, that love or attraction that they feel for someone else doesn't mean that there's less for me. And it's getting away from this idea that I think comes from religion and comes from like capitalism's invention of the nuclear family, this idea that one person has to be everything, you know, your partner has to be everything. They have to be your emotional sounding board. They have to fulfill all your sexual fantasies. They should stimulate you intellectually at all times. I mean, if you have kids, they should be a co-parent. If you own property together, you're basically business partners together. And one person has to do all of that. And if they don't, then there's something wrong with them or there's something wrong with the relationship. And like, that's a lot of fucking pressure to put on one person, and it's so unfair. It's unfair to the individuals, and it's unfair to the relationship to have to hold that much weight.
I never heard it stated like that before, but I would agree. And I suppose that's why the constructs fail often, why divorce rates are so high is because people are really trying to build a lie that they've been taught, and it's not their truth.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that I was going about doing that with my boyfriend because of, religious teachings. It came to a point, girl, I told God this. I was like, you know what? There's so much noise and static in my head from what preachers have told me, from what this voice has said and that voice has said, the military, my abusive dad's household and everything. I said, I want you to remove all of those voices and I'm going to reapproach life. I told him this like last year. I'm about to be 40 years old this year. Can't wait so I can be an official fucking cougar because my boyfriend's 25. And and I tell it, yeah, I'm just gonna like start life over brand new as if I'm just learning everything afresh without the preemptive right or wrong and all of this. They're just gonna approach everything new. I'm just gonna assume I can do anything, and then I will just learn what's right or wrong from you, God, directly, and then we will go from there. I just had to just throw it all away.
Mhm,
It was too
mhm.
confusing. It was too tainted. I just
Right.
got a whole new mind.
But that takes so much courage because, I think so many people lean on like what we've been handed, the default forms of what we've been handed about sexuality, about relationships, about, morality. We just get handed this default and we just go with it. But the scary thing about doing what you've done, and the reason I think it takes so much courage is because you're you're building your own path. You're not relying on a blueprint anymore. And that can be really scary. I mean, it's liberating and it can be really scary.
Help me to understand how it can be scary, because this is something that okay, I feel like we're about to enter into like a counseling session for me right now. This was not how I thought this conversation was going to go, but what you just mentioned is completely lost on me, because maybe, I do have a third eye and I'm very naturally spiritually inclined. And so I tend to like to toe back and forth in between this realm and the next, because that's just how I am. I'm super like Sagittarius, spiritual, Jesus, all that. So for me, evolution and it's natural, and I love to burn some shit down and start it over anew. That's one of my greatest joys in life is newness.
Mm.
But what I'm hearing you saying is this is some people are not necessarily inclined this way, and you say they have so there's fear, there's bravery. This is not even something that, say, like I did in front of a lot of people. This is like a personal choice. So you're saying even in private to make this sort of decision, this can take a lot of bravery for somebody. I need help me to get this.
Yeah. So like, it's like, this is a silly metaphor, but like, let's say like you want to build a house and you like have your blueprint, right? And it's like, here's where the boards go, here's where the nails go, here's where the door goes. And like that blueprint may not be what you want, but at least there's instructions. There's a way to do it, and you know that this way has worked for people. And so you can like do it, and you might not end up with the house you want, but it's going to be like livable. Whereas if you have no blueprint, it's scary because it's like, what if the thing that I do doesn't work? Or what if I have to change it halfway through? Or what if this thing I build, like, it doesn't look like what anyone else built? And how will that be? So even if the instructions are faulty, even if we know that like they don't work for a lot of people, or even if if we know they don't work for us, there is something that I think is safe about doing the thing that like comes with a default set of instructions. And when we shed all that and we have to start from the ground up, I think for a lot of people it can be really disorienting. It can be scary. Sometimes it's hard to find mentors when you're, you know, creating your own.
Huh. I'm going to be thinking about this for a while, because this is going to give me a better understanding of like my own relationships and stuff like that. Because the emotion that I am channeling as you are describing this is, it's kind of like how a freshman might feel on the first day of high school, or how somebody might feel when they're about to get on a roller coaster. That loss of control, complete unknowingness, butterflies just vomiting up out of your stomach and everything like that. And you don't know how to move forward. And so then the tendency is to revert back.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's it.
Hmm. Hmm. You didn't learn me something today, girl. I'm going to think about that one for a minute.
I love it.
Um, okay, so let me get back on track here and get you mentioned that you mentioned living apart together movement a little bit earlier. How big of a deal is this? And what Heidi mentioned earlier was about a situation where maybe two people really are into each other, but they're never going to live together. When I was researching you, you called it the LAT movement, the LAT, living apart together movement. Is this a super big deal right now?
I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger deal for sure. So, and I think some of that is the pandemic, folks being like, wow, when we're stuck at home together, it's like, I love you, but like, I don't want to be with you 24/7. Or, folks who decide not to have kids, sometimes there's like less of that reason to live together. Yeah, and I think a lot of people value their independence and their autonomy, and so they don't necessarily want to live with an intimate partner. And again, this takes courage because it's shedding the blueprint. I have a partner who I've been with for 7 years. We've never lived together. We have no plans of living together. We love each other very much, deeply committed, but don't plan to live together. And it's so interesting, like how the assumptions people throw at us around like, oh, I guess I thought you two were more serious, or I thought you were more committed, or oh, but like if you get married, then you'll move in together, right? And it's like it's so interesting that that is even in the polyamorous community. I feel like there's this like baked in assumption that like serious equals cohabitating, and if you're not doing that, then something must be wrong.
Right. And then there's also the assumption that closeness equals cohabitating. You know, most people get divorced right in front of the same fucking roof. And so just because just because you're living together doesn't mean you're close. That's an aesthetic, prosthetic, superficial, whatever the fuck the right word is. You know, those are optics. People are
Yep.
trying to fit you into what they believe normal is supposed to look like. So you're making other people uncomfortable due to your unconventional approach, and they can't deal with that. So they're trying to shimmy you on down and force you into their box so that they can feel better about themselves, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like it's also like this idea, same with polyamory. It's like a lot of people, their only experience of non-monogamy is cheating. And so they look at polyamory through a cheating lens because that's all they know. And so I think it's the same with the living apart together movement, where it's like their only experience of people living apart is if they're separated and they're doing a trial separation and deciding if they want to get back together or not. So because that's all they know, that's the lens they look through when they see two people who are in a long-term relationship and not living together. And, and that's also like it's living without a blueprint because there's not a lot of models out there for how to, maintain a loving long-term relationship, not living together.
Okay. So you mentioned so some people may have fear about stepping out and trying this new shit and becoming their true self because they may not be able to find a mentor. Speak to me about the polyamory community. So are people able to find this through the internet, through books? If somebody is in that fearful space, how might they reach further and find help?
Yeah, so good. I love that. So I actually just wrote a blog post about this. Well, it's not a blog post, it's a newsletter, but I might someday turn it into a blog post. But so I think building community is huge. I think that piece is really important in because of the reasons we just mentioned, because there's no blueprint, because it can feel really isolating, because there's the stigma. So there's a lot of ways I recommend people start to build community. The first and easiest is look in your community. A lot of times there will be Facebook groups, local Facebook groups, or meetup groups, or sometimes FetLife has some groups that are available. So looking in your for your local resources, are there groups of polyamorous people who are getting together for social reason, like at a bar or, they go bowling or they do karaoke or they have a game night or, something, they have a happy hour once a month or something like that. So finding those places if they exist in your area. And depending where you live, this may or may not exist. Then there's online communities that just exist online. I think though that's another place you can find community, though it can be a little more limited if it just exists online and is not something you can have in person, but can also be really rich. And those can exist on like Facebook and Discord. I think also reading books. There's some good books out there to get you started with non-monogamy and then polyamory. And then like if for folks who have like the local sex shop, not every town has these, but for towns that have independently run little sex shops, they often do educational pieces. They do classes and things. And some of their classes, at least where I live, our indie sex shop does classes on relationship stuff too, not just sex. And so sometimes they'll do classes on things like polyamory. The thing that I love most about my Steady Your Polywobbles course is it's a hybrid thing that involves education, coaching, individual coaching, and community. So even if you don't have anyone where you live, as part of this group, you're in a tight knit group that meets together for 8 weeks. And so you're really building community with these people over the course of 8 weeks. And you might build lifelong friendships with folks who you can have alongside you. And what I always tell people is like that community piece is more important than finding partners. I say prioritize finding community over finding partners because that's what you can lean on when things get tough. That's who you can go to for relationship advice. And then in terms of mentoring, I think finding a good therapist, finding a coach, finding someone in your local community who's been doing this for a long time, who's willing to like share some emotional labor around it are good places to start.
Amen to all of that, honey, on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm going to ask you this the last question, and then I'll let you have the last word. I'd like to know, what can polyamory teach monogamous people about healthy relationships?
Oh, that's such a big one. So I think one thing which we touched on is the jealousy piece. I think that in monogamy, a lot of times jealousy is treated as somebody's doing something wrong. So, if I'm with the partner and, she's talking, she goes up to get a drink and strikes up conversation with someone else at the bar and then comes back and I'm like, hey, you talked to someone else and that made me really jealous. Like, can you not do that anymore? Right? Like, you did something wrong and I didn't like it. Or it's, oh, you're jealous? Well, you're so possessive and clingy. Why don't you get over it yourself? But either way, it's like someone's done something wrong. And I think in polyamory, we reframe jealousy as like, no one's done anything wrong. This is just an experience I'm having. I want to get curious about this. Why am I having this experience? What's coming up for me? And maybe there's a request I want to make of my partner to do something differently, but maybe not. Maybe it's just, oh, I learned something about myself and my triggers, and there's something I can do to like attend to my own feelings in this moment. So I think that's a really big one that I think everyone could benefit from, just like approaching jealousy differently. Yeah, and I think another one is, we already touched on this, but just to highlight it, like that relationship escalator that we talked about. I think monogamous people can benefit from examining that too, because, you know, just because you're monogamous doesn't mean you have to follow that escalator. You may decide that you want to have a baby with someone before you get married, or you may decide that you never want to move in with someone, but you want to be close to them, or, maybe you want to have a long-term relationship and not get married. And so being able to liberate yourself from that escalator and being like, I have to do all these things in order for this to be real. And if I don't, then it's not a legitimate relationship, I think is another really helpful piece that monogamous people can learn. Also, one last thing is like that polyamory can teach is like, we don't own our partners. We don't own them. They are not our property. They are fully autonomous humans. We may have relationship agreements that we both agree to, but there's no ownership, right? We're all people who get to consent to being in relationships with each other. And I think sometimes when monogamy is like not critically examined and just done a default, there are some like possessive traits that come with it. And I'm not saying that monogamy is like possessive inherently. I'm saying that there are ways that people can practice monogamy that can be very possessive, and that, when you examine them and step back from them, you can engage in healthy monogamy without that possession piece.
And baby, whom the Son, as Jesus said it, whom the Son sets free is free indeed. And with the knowledge, you can be made free. Do you have any other advice or closing words you'd like to give to the people of the world?
I think that, yeah, the advice I would give is come back to intention, regardless of the relationship style you choose, whether it's swinger, monogamous, polyamorous. Make sure that you are living from a place of intention. Are you doing this because you choose it, or are you doing this because it was chosen for you? And as long as you're doing what you choose for yourself, then I think that that is healthy and authentic and wonderful. But make sure that it is what you choose and that the other people are consenting to it, and you are good to go.
Fuck yeah. All right. Her name is Heidi Savell. Her website is shelovesradically.com. You can also find her on Instagram. And I'm going to put, of course, all of this in the showy notes, like I always do. Thank you so much, Heidi, for coming on the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus, hallelujah, podcast. and for spilling some tea with me today. This was some really useful fucking information, and I just pray and speak and believe that millions will be set free because of this discussion we've had today.
I love it. And thanks for all the Jesus quotes. You taught this Jewish girl a few things today. I appreciate those good quotes.
Hallelujah. Thank you all so much for taking time to listen to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. It really means everything to me. Look, if you love the show, you can find more information and resources at sexdrugsandjesus.com or wherever you listen to your podcast. Feel free to reach out to me directly at devannon@sexdrugsandjesus.com and on Twitter and Facebook as well. My name is Devannon, and it's been wonderful being your host today. And just remember that everything is going to be all right.